Good morning and welcome. Thank you for joining us. We have a lot of updates to go over with you today, so you're going to hear from several speakers. We have Akron Mayor Shamus Malik. We have Deputy Chief David Laughlin from the Akron Police Department. We have our Chief, Brian Harding, and then we have one of the co-chairs of our Gun Violence Response Fund, Tracy Carter. So we will have time for Q&A at the end, so I would just ask that you keep your questions until the end of our press conference. And at this time, I'd like to welcome up Akron Mayor Shamus Malik.
Good morning, everyone. Happy to be with you here today. Thank you for joining us. Before we start off, just a light note, many of you may have seen that I recently got married. Very excited for this new life that Alice and I are starting, but excited to talk about some important issues, some very serious issues here with you all today. The first thing I'd like to address is that a joint status report was filed yesterday by City of Akron attorneys and attorneys for the family of Jalen Walker, stating that the parties are finalizing a settlement discussion around the lawsuit into Mr. Walker's death. Because this is still pending, we are working on coordinating the details and the release of the details of that settlement with the family and their attorneys, and we plan to have more to share with you on those details in the coming days. I'm sure that's a topic of significant interest. We plan to have that for everyone in the next few days, but we want to coordinate with the family and their team. I want to take a moment and start by addressing the incident that occurred in January when an APD officer used force against Ms. De'Ara Fields. So there's been considerable discussion about this in the community. I want to kind of walk through the background of what happened. In the investigation that followed, APD's Office of Professional Standards and Accountability determined that the use of force with regard to Ms. Fields did not violate the policy, the use of force policy, that it was objectively reasonable. The Independent Police Auditor's Office and the Civilian Police Oversight Board, in the first case that they reviewed, disagreed with that determination and recommended that that determination be changed, in addition to a number of other recommendations, including engaging in a comprehensive review of the city's use of force policy. So Chief Harding and APD's Internal Affairs Office of Professional Standards and Accountability went back and reviewed the incident again. Based upon their professional judgment, they did not agree with the auditor's recommendation on the use of force. They maintained the determination that the use of force was within policy and was objectively reasonable. That is the administration's determination for the purposes of discipline. I've discussed the issue during the course of this process repeatedly with Chief Harding, and I did not ask him to change that determination. What I see here is that there are many people in the community who say that whether this is within policy or not, that what happened, that this use of force involving Ms. Fields is not the kind of policing we want to see. And honestly, that's how I feel too. From when I first watched the recording to standing here with you all today. At the same time, we have law enforcement professionals who are policing experts who are saying it's not a good outcome, but that it's not something prohibited by our policy. So that means, in my mind, in my judgment, that we need to do a comprehensive policy review into our use of force policy. We need to find ways to strengthen and improve that policy, to highlight the type of policing that we want to see, and to make bad outcomes like this less likely. Now, my administration has had this as a priority for some time. We talked about it at the State of the City. We readily agreed in our response to the auditor and the Oversight Board's recommendations that we needed to engage in this, and we've been working on this. We've committed to this review. In the coming weeks, we will share many more details about this process, which will be coordinated by our public safety strategist, Tony Ingram, in concert with the rest of our team. In this review, we will make sure that the Auditor's Office and the Oversight Board, as well as the public, have a role and a voice. We are looking at how other communities have navigated this process. The City of Columbus recently went through this process just in the last few months. And again, we plan to have many more details to share within the next month, particularly on how residents can share their perspective and can engage meaningfully on this topic. In my mind, this review is the way that we have lasting, meaningful change on this issue. I want us to have a real discussion as a community about what we want to see from our officers, recognizing that a lot of people feel that cases like this should be prohibited, recognizing that there are a lot of difficult cases where split-second determinations need to be made, but having those conversations as a community head on and finding a solution, coming through those difficult conversations and coming out on the other side with a policy and practices that hopefully we can all have more confidence in. I also want to directly respond to the calls for the chief to resign. I think those are misplaced. He has my full support. I believe he is the right person to lead us and lead this department to help us accomplish the change that people are demanding. I asked the chief for his best judgment on very difficult matters. That judgment is informed by his knowledge and by years of experience, and I take that very seriously. Now, policy change is not the only way to improve systems. Training is a big piece of it, and Chief Harding will have more to say on that. We are going to continue working with the Auditor's Office and the Civilian Oversight Board on responses. They have shared 6 reports so far over the last 6 months. We have responded to 3 of them so far. We are working on the next 3, and we are working to make sure that we have this dialogue and relationship that is productive. I'm sure there are going to be recommendations that we accept as we have done so far on some of the portions. I'm sure there are going to be other times where the chief and I disagree with something that the Auditor's Office puts forward. I believe that this dialogue, however uncomfortable, and it is uncomfortable, is healthy and can help us improve. But we have to acknowledge that there's not always going to be agreement. Lastly, as I said, these are very difficult issues. Often these are situations that are very difficult to watch. I know there are strong feelings. I don't expect everyone to agree with me or to agree with the way that I see things. I'd also like to talk briefly, before I turn it over to others, about the conditional use request for the new waste transfer facility on Archwood Avenue to replace the longtime waste transfer facility on Fountain Street. This is another topic that has raised particular concern in the community. It is a very important issue. So, as many folks know, Waste Management, WM, as they have shortened their name, they own and operate an existing waste transfer facility on Fountain Street that has existed since the 1970s. And city trucks collect trash from curbside bins, bring them to that central facility near Route 8 and Exchange Street, and then all those materials are deposited in a larger truck and then taken out of the city each day to the permanent landfill site outside of Summit County. The transfer station is not a dump or a landfill itself. So the Fountain Street's facility's age and also its close proximity to homes, it is directly adjacent to homes in Middlebury, has long been a critical issue for residents around Betty Street, around the old Mason Park, Mason Elementary. Residents have advocated literally for decades. There are documents going back to the 90s advocating and asking the administration to open a facility in a different location, in a better location. And my administration, as well as the previous administration, believed that the facility on Fountain Street needed to be moved to a different location. Akron deserves a modern waste transfer facility, one that's located on a much larger portion of land and much farther away from residents. So over the last 2 years, the last administration and the current administration have shared locations with WM for their consideration. It is ultimately their facility that they would invest in and build. But we again, the previous administration and this administration had very strong opinions because we don't want to recreate the same issues in a different location. And so foremost among them was distance from residential homes. And in this case, in the Archwood facility that WM ultimately decided to move forward with this past May, that was a really critical feature, right? That in most cases, it is 1,000 feet from residential neighborhoods. In one case, on the other side away from the wind, it is more than 500 feet away, as opposed to the current facility, which is directly adjacent and has been for decades to residential homes. So in May, Waste Management requested conditional use zoning approval because approval from council is required to open up any transfer facility anywhere in the city. And so before this went to the City Planning Commission, before this went to City Council, our administration has been engaging with the community, with stakeholders, with council members. We worked with council members to present at ward meetings. We offered tours of WM's newer Oakwood facility to city officials, to members of the public, to council members. I participated in one of those tours. City staff actually engaged in flyering, going out and hitting the pavement and sharing fact sheets with neighborhoods, even the neighborhoods that are again removed from the immediate location, with the intent of sharing information and engaging with the public. Again, this was all before the formal process of Planning Commission and council review started. This is really important to me, right? We have to share these things on the front end. And frankly, I think the 9-hour hearing that we just had, no one can remember a longer hearing, is partially a result of how much engagement has happened at the front end. So Akron City Council is now reviewing, they're taking their time on this conditional use zoning request. Tomorrow, Ward 5 Council Member Johnny Hanna is hosting a meeting at Joy Park Community Center. That's going to be at 6 p.m. I'd encourage residents who want to learn more to please attend that. I also want to thank our city staff that have put in an awful lot of work on this issue, including Service Director Chris Luddle and his service team, our Director of Sustainability and Resiliency, Casey Shevlin, Nanette Pitt, our Chief of Strategy, our Planning Director, Kyle Julian, and his team that have actually managed this whole conditional use zoning review process. I also, as I mentioned in the last issue, recognize that members of our community have brought up concerns. There are concerns about the new facility, and I think that we should engage with those concerns directly and head on. This, as I said, has been an issue at the present location. We want to make sure it's not an issue. We believe this is a much, much, much better location for this to be located in. I want to be clear, though, also about the facts. Some door hangers said that this was a hazardous waste facility. That is not true. It is not a hazardous waste facility. We talk about moving the facility. I just want to say one more time, we are not moving the Fountain Street facility to Archwood. We are asking them to build a new facility, a much better facility. The Oakwood facility is itself a much better facility than Fountain Street, but this would be, I think, even better. It's 10 years newer than Oakwood. So we'll continue to engage with stakeholders and community members on this issue, both before council votes and after council votes. So thank you very much for bearing with me. I'd like to invite up Chief Harding and Deputy Chief Laughlin.
Thank you, Mayor, and good morning, everybody. Today we have some really positive news to share regarding declining trends around violent crime in the city of Akron. Across almost every data point, you were seeing violent crime decrease in our community. We have handouts with this information that we will pass around. It will also be available online after the press conference. At this point, I'm going to ask Deputy Chief Laughlin to kind of cover some of those details with you.
Thank you, Chief. I'd like to start out by offering some insight into the FBI's Uniform Crime Report from 2022 that was recently the subject of a news story. As a result of the article, we did an in-depth analysis of our case clearances and found some internal shortcomings as well as some nuances about our record management system we were previously unaware of. We're updating our processes and making sure that we are more diligent and accurate, and making sure that any corrected reports are reported to the state of Ohio. After extensive work by detectives and our crime analyst, we found our solve rate was 21.46%, up from the 13% that were reported by the FBI. Although this solve rate may appear low, you'll see in the data that Chief Harding referenced that we are seeing an encouraging trend in a reduction in violent crime in Akron. We have done a comparative analysis year-to-date from 2023 to the same time period in 2024. So that's through September of 2024 compared to September of 2023. We've seen a 33% decrease in a number of shootings and shots fired calls. We've seen a 38% decrease in the number of shootings into habitations. There's been a 25% overall decrease in the number of offenses where a firearm was used. And last year at this time, we had 20 murders in Akron compared to 15 this year, which is a 25% decrease over 2023. I'm pleased to report that of the 35 combined murders from 23 and 24, we've made an arrest or signed a warrant on 23 of them so far, which is a 66% solve rate. As a point of reference, the national solve rate for murders is 52%. This is a testament to the dedication of our investigators to seek justice for the families of our victims. Last year at this time, we had 133 adult non-fatal shooting victims and 21 juvenile non-fatal shooting victims. Comparatively, so far this year, we've had 107 adult non-fatal shooting victims and 14 juvenile non-fatal related shooting victims. This means across the board, we have seen a 21% in these data sets. Additionally, we've seen a 2% decrease in robberies, an 8% decrease in felonious assaults, and a 9% decrease in rapes. The only area we have seen an increase is in recovering illegal guns. Our officers and partners agencies are working around the clock to get guns off our streets. Year-to-date last year, we recovered 648 firearms by this time, and so far this year, we have recovered 806, which is a 24% increase in illegal firearms seized and not able to victimize our community. Turn it back over to Chief Harding.
Thank you, Chief Lachlan. We're very happy to see the data moving in a positive trend, but we will continue to work diligently to reduce violent crime in our community. Let me be clear that there's more work to be done, and even one shooting is too many, and one unsolved murder weighs heavily on our department. I want to take this opportunity to applaud the efforts of our officers as well as our community to make Akron a safer place for all of us. At this point, I'd also like to provide a brief update on the June 2nd shooting. We have continued to receive tips on the shooting, and detectives continue to follow up on each and every tip that we receive. Since our last update, detectives have worked in excess of an additional 400 hours on this case. We continue to ask anyone with information to please come forward. You can remain anonymous. We have a detective who continues to work exclusively on this case. We also continue to work with a number of our partner agencies, including the ATF, the FBI, the Bureau of Criminal Investigation, the U.S. Marshals, and the Summit County Sheriff's Office to work on this case. While this case may not be in the headlines anymore, I think it's important our community knows that we continue to work diligently and would ask anybody with any information to please come forward. Even the smallest tip could make the break that we need in this case. Reference the auditor's report in my response. Earlier, the mayor mentioned that we were going to talk about policy, and I also want to spend a moment and talk about training. We have been working on additional use of force training and de-escalation training for our officers. In early 2025, we'll be training on our officers on ICAT. This is an advanced communication and assessment and tactics training sponsored by PERF. We currently have 22 officers going through that training to become trainers now. This will provide our first responders with the tools, skills, and options they need to defuse a range of critical incidents successfully and safely. It is an innovative and evidence-based approach to the use of force training, and we look forward to offering it to each and every one of our officers. Before I conclude, I wanted to address the recent statements made by some members of the community expressing their disappointment in my response to the police auditor. I take this very seriously. I respect the input and feedback of Auditor Fennell and the Citizens Oversight Board, and find value having important dialogue about our policing policies and practices. I and members of our department have been meeting with community leaders and community groups to learn about their expectations of public safety. I remain deeply committed to continuing this important work as we strive for the best outcomes. The auditor and I may not always agree on his findings, but we both want what's best for Akron and for the safety of everyone. I will not have any further comment on this matter at this time. At this time, I'd like to welcome up Tracy Carter to provide an update on the gun violence response plan.
Thank you, Chief. Good morning, everyone. My name is Tracy Carter, and I serve as co-chair of the Gun Violence Response Fund Advisory Committee. Ron Pato and Pastor Charles Myrick are also co-chairs of this committee. The Gun Violence Response Fund was initiated with leadership from the City of Akron, Akron Community Foundation, the United Way of Summit Medina, and Victim Assistance Program. The advisory committee was formed to give structure to the fund and to help raise funds from individuals, foundations, and corporations to benefit individuals affected by gun violence. Year to date, the Gun Violence Response Fund has raised nearly $310,000. The advisory committee is ensuring fund dollars are being utilized to help individuals recover from gun violence, heal, and move forward with their lives. We have prioritized dollars to help individuals with their basic life needs, which includes housing, food, utility, phone, and car transportation costs. Since June 10th, 2024, the fund has awarded $90,000 to Victim Assistance Program. Victim Assistance has used these funds to support 24 of the 29 victims from the June 2nd mass shooting incident. Victim Assistance is also using funds to support individuals who have been affected by gun violence after June 2nd. Since June 3rd, through present date, 29 victims in total who have been affected by gun violence have received financial assistance from the fund. 36% of the Victim Assistance Program grant have supported individuals with their housing expenses. 32% has helped with basic human needs, including utilities and groceries, and 26% to help with transportation costs. Victim Assistance is working closely with the Ohio Attorney General's office to ensure victims get the information and support they need to apply to the state's Victims Compensation Program. The program is designed to help victims with larger and longer-term expenses, out-of-pocket expenses, which includes like medical bills and counseling expenses. As of today, 16 victims have moved forward with their applications. The next steps for the Gun Violence Response Advisory Committee are as follows. We're going to continue to recruit individuals to the committee who have lived experience with gun violence to serve on our committee. We're also going to continue our fundraising efforts to help future victims of gun violence. We want to reach our goal of at least $350,000 raised by year end. And again, we're approaching individuals, businesses, and corporations, foundations to help with this task. And for those who are listening online who would like to contribute, I ask you to go to akroncf.org/Gun Violence Response Fund to make a contribution. Again, akroncf.org/Gun Violence Response Fund to make a contribution. We're also going to, as a committee, work through a process to make sure we capture the stories of the victims and report them confidentially and compassionately to the public and to the donors so they can fully understand and appreciate the impact this fund has had in restoring individuals' lives. And then we also are going to work to make sure that the community is aware of victim assistance and their services to help victims move through pain and access help as they restore their lives. And so with that, that concludes my update on the Gun Violence Response Fund. And with that, I turn the agenda back over to Ms. Marsh.
Thank you, Tracy, and thank you to all of our speakers this morning. I know we went through a lot of information with you this morning, so I'm sure you have a lot of questions, and we have several outlets here. So we are going to open it up to Q&A. I would just ask that you keep it to one question at a time so everybody gets an opportunity to ask. And I will just remind you, the mayor did mention at the very beginning regarding the settlement, because that is still pending. We are not going to be able to answer questions on that at this time. So at this time, I'll open it up. We have questions over here. Go ahead, Derek.
Chief Harding, you mentioned that you were speaking to several community groups regarding their expectations of the department. Could you name who some of those organizations are?
I prefer not. Those have been private conversations, and I would prefer to keep it that way at this point.
Okay, thank you.
For both the mayor and the chief, and if you would mind being at the microphone so we can hear you guys better. On the calls for the chief to lose his job, can you give us your thoughts to that request that was made by Freedom Block, your reaction to that, both you and the chief? I know you were limiting what you were saying, but just any action that's gonna be taken or any thoughts that you have about that?
I respectfully, I think I did cover that. I think those calls are misplaced, and he has my full support. As I said, to me, this incident highlights the need for this comprehensive use of force review. This is something that is not a small undertaking. It's important that we get this right, that we take the time to look at incidents, because this is respectfully not the first time someone has said, here's an incident that we don't want to see, that seems to be permitted under the policy and the current interpretation of the policy, right? And so to me, this use of force review is policy change and systems change. And that is the answer to the very real direct concern posed by this case involving Ms. Fields.
And for the chief?
I think the mayor, for the most part, covered that.
I guess, but if it was a personal, they were personally calling on you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, listen, I took this job with the belief that we needed to engage and we need to work on building trust in our community. I'm still deeply committed to that work, and I look forward to working with everybody in that regard.
Anybody else on this side of the room before we move over? Yeah, Sue?
So mostly for Chief Harding, in your report responding to Auditor Fennell's opinion about the Deera Fields case, you cited a Supreme Court decision that essentially, I'm just going to read it out loud, said an officer's actions must be considered from the perspective of what any other reasonable officer would have done under the totality of the circumstances without 20/20 hindsight. Going forward toward a new policy, can you eliminate that case from the internal policies of the Akron PD, or do you have to consider that case moving forward as well?
I think that's the standard for use of force across the country, is the Graham factors in the Graham case. So I think that's imperative that we continue to look at that. But there are, I think the dialogue and the communication that we worked through together can look at possible updates and changes to our policy, and we're open to that.
You know, I really meant what I said when I talked about this being a conversation with the community where everyone can say what they want to see from policing. And I imagine that if you ask 200,000 people, you're going to get a lot of different responses, and hopefully some consensus. I think my opinion's important. I think the chief's opinion's important. I think everyone's opinion's important. But I don't want to prejudge what that will look like. I think we need to bring the ideas and put them on the table and do it in a really professional, really serious way. And again, it's not going to be one change, but we have to look at every possible way of strengthening and improving this policy.
Anybody else over here?
Yeah, you mentioned the June shooting. What are some of the hurdles that are the challenges that are getting in the way of, I guess, solving that, after talking about the good solve rate that you guys have seen?
Yeah, so that's a challenging case. To identify the initial shooter that started that is not something we've been able to successfully do at this point. We've had some leads and information. We continue to work that, but we do not have enough detail on that. So if anybody may have that information, that's what we continue to implore people to come forward. But that's really the crux of the biggest challenge that we're having.
Yes, sir.
I have a question for Mayor Malik. Andrew Kuiper, Education Reporter with Signal Akron. Can you talk to me a little bit about why it's important for the community to pass HB 27, and that if it fails, what options the city has at its disposal to support the rebuilding of North High School?
Absolutely. So, in terms of the levy, I'm happy to talk to you after work hours because we've been trying to maintain the distinction that when you're talking about things on the ballot and levies and charter changes and all those things, that's something done outside of City Hall without city resources. I'm happy to talk to you about that later today. I think, our administration has really tried to prioritize education and be a partner with Akron Public Schools. In terms of the North CLC specifically, the city, under Mayor Pasquale, really was the partner to pass this income tax to rebuild schools. The fact that North High School has not been rebuilt is really a failing that we all share in. And you have a building that's roughly 100 years old that's really falling apart. It demands a solution. We've been working with our education and health strategist, Rochelle Wardell, to have a lot of conversations with APS about what that might look like. But that is priority of our administration, regardless of where things go on a levy. We view that as an obligation for city government in partnership with Akron Public Schools.
Mayor Malik, when you were running for mayor in the years before then, you regularly evoked the killings of George Floyd and other incidents of police violence against black people and the need for immediate reform. Regarding the Tamir Rice case, you rallied against the reasonable test that prosecutor used to not prosecute the officers who killed him. In 2021, about a Louisiana incident where officers beat a black man, you wrote, "As long as we continue to shield officers from liability in clear-cut cases of unjustifiable behavior, we will see these kinds of videos." I'm wondering, how is the Deerfields video different than the ones you previously spoke about, or has your perspective changed since becoming mayor?
What I tried to say here today is that I don't view what happened in that video as what people want to see, as acceptable. So in that way, I don't believe it's different. Again, what I'm trying to say is that the issue here, if you accept that not everyone might agree with me on that, right? But if that's what I'm hearing from a lot of people in the community, and that's a feeling that I have as well, then to me, the answer is to look at the policy. Because to me, the issue is the policy, right? And that's not to say there's some way that you can flip a switch and, there is a tremendous amount of complexity in this, right? We can't make policy that, with perfectly envisioning every situation in foresight. But to me, that is the issue here, is cases that people see as unacceptable, broadly, and a policy which says these are not subject to discipline, right? And so that is how I'm trying to address it. To me, that is change. I've talked a lot in a lot of those posts that you mentioned, talk about systems change, right? To me, that is systems change, right? Scapegoating someone is not, right? I don't believe that's going to get us to where we need to go. I believe that having a very difficult conversation and then having meaningful action come out of that about the policy is an essential step. It's not the only step, right? Training is a big piece of it. Engagement and trust building is a big piece of it. But policy is a crucial part, and frankly, one that we have not gotten to, right? And if I can just go a little bit further, some people look at the oversight board and say, well, here's the first recommendation they had, and you're not taking it. The first recommendation, really there's 6, right? And several of them, the request has been from the auditor, hey, to me, this highlights the need for this overall review, right? And so to me, that's where we need to put our focus. That's where we need to put our energy. I'll stop after this. In 10 months of doing this job, there is a specific amount of time in the day. We have a specific number of people, specific number of resources. This is where I think we can get the most change, the most lasting change that sticks, if we spend our time and focus on this.
I mean, with all due respect, you've been talking about systemic change and the need for change within the Akron Police Department since 2020. I mean, it's been 10 months now, and it feels like without this report becoming public from the auditor's office, we're not having this conversation.
I totally disagree with you, right? The administration before this report had already committed to reviewing our use of force policy, but the fact that this has been highlighted by the auditor several times certainly adds urgency to it, certainly adds seriousness to it. And I would just, with respect, go back and say that as someone who fought to have this system in place with an auditor, a deputy auditor, to have the independence to push a mayor, I think that also validates that. I think this is an important part of the process. It's not comfortable. It's messy. It is filled with tension. But just in a few months, the auditor's office has highlighted this as a particular focus. It is a particular focus that I had as well. And so we are working to expedite the actual process of that review. Now, I can't stand in front of you today and say we're going to do it A, B, and C, and here's the places where people can go to provide comment and things like that, right? Because I don't want to get ahead of myself and do a big thing badly. But we are going to move forward with this with haste, and within the next several weeks, we are going to have more details for the public on what that process looks like.
I had a question for Chief Harding. Could you talk a little bit more about the training that you mentioned and how that will be implemented and what kind of additional skills or change that you think that will bring to the department?
Sure. So PERF, Police Executive Research Forum, you can look it up online as well. It's called ICAT. It's an advanced, it uses a lot of scenario-based training. It also is a decision-making model that allows, increases time, distance, different tactics that we can additionally use to make an assessments in cases about how to use force, where to go, positioning. I know Louisville did a really detailed study after they went live with that and saw a significant decrease in use of force after that. They've seen decrease in injuries to citizens and to officers. So it's a really exciting program. I'm excited we're going to roll it out. Like I mentioned, we have 22 people currently in our department that are going through that training now. We brought them in for that training. They're actually finishing it up today. And then we will start rolling that out at the beginning of 2025. Not only is it training in classroom, but it's also a lot of scenario-based training, which is really the kind of the trend to put our officers in those positions and try to give them additional tools and resources that they need. I think training is an extremely important area for us as we look at this area, use force.
Will that be mandatory for all?
It will be. Yep. Yes.
I can just add really quick, this ICAT training has been something that's been in the works for about 5 months, I think. And so we're happy that now people will have been trained on it and they can be the trainers.
Anybody else on this side of the room with a question? Come back over here, any follow-ups?
In regards to the June 2nd shooting, what do you say, either for the chief or the mayor, to the victims, the 29 victims, the level of frustration that they might be experiencing, and 4 months later, there's still, to our knowledge, no warrants, no charges. They may feel, some of them have said, like, the case is being forgotten. Clearly, that's not the case, but what do you tell them?
We have been working, I have been speaking directly with some of the victims and having those conversations with them. You know, I think all of us wish that we had different news to share there, right? Chief Harding and I meet weekly and we talk about it every week. We want to put the resources behind this that we need to work on solving this case, and that will continue. And you know, the Gun Violence Response Fund is one way of supporting victims, but absolutely showing the victims of this crime and the community as a whole that we are working to hold people accountable, whether it's this shooting or other shootings, is absolutely essential. So we will continue talking about it. We will continue updating people, whether we have, you know, massive breaking news or we have smaller news, and we will continue communicating with the victims directly.
Mayor, can you tell me if, do you know if WM is already under contract with Crown Enterprises to buy the Archwood property?
I do not.
Any other questions? Okay.
Just have one more.
Oh, sorry.
Is there anything the violent crime drop, Chief, is there anything you attribute that to, from, this is just from 1 year to the next, right, 23 to 24?
Correct.
And it's the same numbers you provided to the FBI, or are these different statistics?
So
that you
the report that was initially came out in the paper was 2022 crime stats, and I think Chief Lachlan covered that. Some changes and things we've tightened up as well. But we, nationally, they're seeing a trend of decrease in violent crime. I think we're even kind of leading in front of that. I think there's a lot of reasons. I do believe that some of the enhanced community engagement that we're continuing to do, I think it's important to note when we talk about, I mentioned a couple times earlier about park walk and talks and getting our officers to engage. We're up over 3,200 calls this year doing that. I think those things do make a difference and allowed us to get additional information for the community. As we talk about violent crime, we take it very seriously, but it's also a community issue. I think the community and a lot of our partner agencies as well, and I also think our staff and the team that we have. We have an excellent group of detectives and officers that work really hard on violent crime. We take it seriously. Whether we mention victim assistance and other partner agencies as well. I think it's important we solve those cases. They make a real impact in our people we serve every day. So I think it's community engagement. I think it's making sure we're getting the right people involved in crime. And we find that it's a small minority of people that are involved in the majority of violent crime. And I think that's really important that we continue to put resources there.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. We are going to put out some of the data that was shared around with you. I'll put that out after the press conference, so you'll have that. And then if you have other questions, just let us know. Thanks so much for coming.